May 6, 1937, 7:25 p.m., the moment the Hindenburg catches fire. A spark ignites the tail of the 804-foot airship as it descends toward Lakehurst Naval Air Station. With each second, the fire eats away at the dirigible's outer casing, engulfing more and more of the aircraft in flames. The hydrogen that once lifted the Hindenburg into the skies is the fuel for the fire that now consumes it. The burning airship descends closer and closer to the ground. Captain Max Pruss screams for his crew and the 36 passengers on board to abandon ship. People jump out windows and fall to the earth. Bones are broken. Shrieks of pain from the condemned souls trapped aboard the airship are silenced as the Hindenburg slams into the ground. All around the airfield, observers run in terror to escape the blaze. A brave group of soldiers runs back toward the inferno in an attempt to rescue any survivors. In less than a minute, all that remains of the Hindenburg is its metal skeleton and the flames consuming anything that's still flammable. Millions of people listen to reporter Herb Morrison explain the tragedy in real time. His voice crackles over the airwaves. There's smoke and there's flames now, and the frame is crashing into the ground, not quite to the mooring mast. Oh, the humanity. 1852, 85 years before the Hindenburg disaster. Henri Giffard, a French engineer, sits in his office working on schematics for a new design he's been envisioning. He puts his pencil down and holds up his drawing to the light. Merda, he spits. The design is not quite right. He goes back to work, perfecting what will be the first airship ever built. After years of work and months securing the parts he needs, Giffard is finally ready to test his invention. He has secured a 350-pound or 160-kilogram steam engine that's capable of outputting 3 horsepower. This is just enough to spin a large propeller at 110 revolutions per minute. In order to lift the engine into the sky, Giffard fills a 144-foot or 44-meter-long canvas bag with hydrogen. A crowd has been gathering around the makeshift airfield as Giffard's dirigible rises up into the air. "It works!" Giffard yells at the top of his lungs. His airship ascends higher and higher over the Paris skyline. The propeller begins turning, and the dirigible proceeds over the Paris Hippodrome at 6 miles per hour, or about 10 kilometers per hour. The crowd below applauds the magnificent contraption and its inventor as it cruises through the air and continues its 20-mile journey toward Elancourt. It's here that some of the hydrogen is slowly released, and the simple but groundbreaking vessel comes in for a landing. This is the first flight of an airship that will lead to decades of innovation, exploration, and eventual catastrophe. 1872, 65 years before the Hindenburg disaster. A German engineer by the name of Paul Heinlein seeks to improve earlier airship designs and make them more efficient. He swapped out the steam-powered engine for an internal combustion engine. The genius of his design is that the vessel can use the gas-filled bag as a fuel source to keep the propeller spinning. The next step forward in airship aviation comes from another set of Frenchmen, when in 1883, 2 brothers named Albert and Gaston Tissandier successfully fly an airship using an electric motor. This will also be the first rigid airship that has an aluminum hull, and although the vessel is designed by French engineers, it's built in Germany. This is a precursor for what is to come and the eventual construction of the Hindenburg. 1900, 37 years before the Hindenburg disaster. Ferdinand von Zeppelin looks upon his creation. It's a rigid-hulled airship that's designated LZ-1. It's a sight to behold, Zeppelin says to the gathered engineers. The LZ-1 will be the first in numerous designs that will eventually lead to the Hindenburg being constructed. And although there will be many improvements on this first design in the future, the LZ-1 solidifies Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin as the father of German airships. In the years to come, his company's vessels will carry supplies and people across Europe and drop bombs on Germany's enemies. The LZ-1 is carefully moved into position for liftoff. The airship is 420 feet or 128 meters long and 38 feet or approximately 11.6 meters in diameter, making it one of the largest dirigibles ever constructed. The 2 16-horsepower engines roar to life as the airship rises from the ground. Engineers, scientists, and government officials stand below the LZ-1 as it accelerates to 20 miles per hour. Some see the future of air travel, others see a vessel that can be turned into a weapon. However, one thing is for sure, if Zeppelin can continue to improve his designs for airships, the sky is the limit. But before we go any further, we have a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who's going through a hard time, therapy can give you the tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/infographics. Clicking that link helps you support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit in with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a therapist for free without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/infographics. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. Now back to our story. World War I rages in Europe. A Zeppelin drifts over Paris. The crew aboard drops bombs from the balconies running under the dirigible. Below, Allied troops dive for cover. The airships are slow and the bombs are inaccurate, but these lighter-than-air behemoths strike fear into the hearts of anyone below them. French soldiers fire their weapons at the dirigible as it passes overhead, but it's not an easy target to hit from the ground below. The Zeppelin circles back around for another pass. The Allied soldiers seek shelter as bombs are tossed over the railing and fall to the ground below. They strike buildings, blow the roof off of civilian structures, and decimate vehicles. A few explosives hit a weapons cache and detonate stores of ammunition. After the previous bombing, days of relative peace and quiet go by, but everyone knows that another airship could appear in the sky at any moment. The psychological toll these vessels take is almost as devastating as the bombs they drop. A shadow passes over the streets of London. A German Zeppelin has crossed the English Channel, blocking out the sun. People run for cover as bombs fall from the sky. Many years later, Winston Churchill will call the airships enormous bladders of combustible and explosive gas. But right now, this relatively new technology is on the frontier of a new type of warfare, one where the enemy never needs to put boots on the ground to cause destruction and mayhem. As the war progresses, British scientists discover that by firing a burst of both incendiary and explosive bullets at an airship, it's enough to set it ablaze. This allows Allied forces to destroy several German airships and reduce the threat that they pose. Both the Allies and the Germans continue to use airships for surveillance and to locate vessels in the water around Europe. However, the vessel's combat capabilities have been significantly reduced, and airplanes are becoming the future of aerial warfare. 1928, 9 years before the Hindenburg Disaster. After World War I comes to an end, German engineers refocus their attention on creating airships that can move supplies and groups of people. The Graf Zeppelin is completed and prepares for the first ever transatlantic airship flight. This will also be the first commercial passenger flight across an ocean. The Graf Zeppelin will continue to operate for years, even when its more advanced successor, the Hindenburg, takes to the sky in less than a decade. At 7:54 a.m. on October 11, 1928, the Graf Zeppelin takes off from an airfield in Friedrichshafen, Germany. There are 40 crew members on board, commanded by Hugo Eckener. The airship carries 20 passengers, who are a mix of reporters and wealthy adventurers. The Zeppelin makes its way across Europe and into the open skies over the Atlantic Ocean. The flight is smooth, the trip uneventful, until the morning of October 13th, when the airship encounters a storm. "Increase our altitude," Eckener screams. "The only way we are going to get through this is if we give it everything she's got." The engineers are pushed to their limit as the airship shakes violently from the turbulence. Suddenly, the entire Zeppelin pitches to the side. The crew knows that other airships traveling through similar weather have been ripped apart in the past. However, Eckener is experienced. He orders the crew to balance the airship and maintain course. The crew regains control of the dirigible, but something is off. "Sir, we've lost the lower covering of the port fin," one of the crew members informs the captain. There's silence on the bridge. Eckener scratches his chin as he thinks. Continuing on could be a death sentence for everyone on board, but turning back isn't really an option at this point. "All right," Eckener says, "send a repair crew to the back and patch up my vessel. We need to get everyone across the Atlantic safely." The crew jumps into action and begins making the necessary repairs. Men skirt along the metal frame to reach the port side of the airship. They begin by working to repair the broken fin as strong winds blow and rain whips across their faces. The engineers tie themselves to the bracing struts just in case a strong gust throws them off balance and they fall. While the repairs are being made, Captain Eckener sends out a distress call. "Mayday, mayday, this is the Graf Zeppelin. We've sustained damage and are making repairs now. Please be advised a rescue mission may be needed if the airship goes down. The distress call is picked up over the airwaves by everyone who has a radio, including the press. They run fantastical stories of the imminent destruction of the Graf Zeppelin on its maiden voyage, similar to the unsinkable ocean liner that hit an iceberg and now lays at the bottom of the ocean. It's almost as if the press is practicing for a real disaster that everyone knows is bound to come. Hours later, one of the engineers bursts onto the bridge. "Sir, we've completed the repairs, should be good for the rest of the flight as long as we don't encounter any more storms." The captain nods. The voyage across the Atlantic continues. As they approach Bermuda, their luck once again runs out. Another violent gust of winds rock the Graf Zeppelin. The airship is blown from side to side, but the crew did an excellent job repairing the damaged fin, and the dirigible makes it through the storm unscathed. On October 15th, the Graf Zeppelin reaches the coast of the United States. It continues its journey north, passing over Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City. Finally, the dirigible lands at Lakehurst, New Jersey, the very same location where the Hindenburg disaster will occur 9 years later. The trip took longer than expected due to the damage sustained by the airship during the storm. The Graf Zeppelin runs out of food and water, but everyone forgets about those minor inconveniences when they land and are greeted like heroes. The flight time of the first transatlantic voyage by airship comes in at just around 111 hours and 44 minutes. The airship undergoes 2 weeks of repairs before lifting off for its return flight back to Europe. The Graf Zeppelin leaves Lakehurst on October 29, 1928, and returns to Germany in 71 hours, 49 minutes, or just under 3 days. The world is astonished. The ocean liners of the time take twice as long to complete the same trip. On August 7, 1929, the Graf Zeppelin leaves Lakehurst, New Jersey for another first-ever flight. It will travel back to Germany. However, the vessel will not stop there. The airship will continue its travels east and begin a round-the-world voyage. It'll take just less than a month for the Graf Zeppelin to complete its trip. On September 4, 1929, the Graf Zeppelin once again lands at Lakehurst after circumnavigating the globe. In the years to come, a bigger and faster airship will be built, the Hindenburg. But the dreams of airship manufacturers and enthusiasts around the world will come crashing down the very same moment the Hindenburg does. October 5, 1930, 7 years before the Hindenburg disaster. "Brace for impact!" shouts the captain of the British airship R-101. The dirigible slams into the ground just outside of Allons, France. The vessel bursts into flames, scorching the surrounding landscape. Rescue crews search through the mangled steel frame of the vessel, looking for any survivors. 48 men die in the accident. It will not be the last tragedy to befall the crew of an airship. On April 3, 1933, the USS Akron crashes along the New Jersey coast after running into bad weather. All but 3 of the 76 people on board die. 1931, 6 years before the Hindenburg disaster. A group of engineers from the Zeppelin company meet with executives, bankers, and government officials. Their presentation impresses everyone in the room. The design is for a new airship, designated LZ-129. It'll be the next ship in airship evolution after the Graf Zeppelin. The engineers explained that the vessel will be 804 feet or 245 meters long. This behemoth of a dirigible will be powered by 4 1,100 horsepower engines, which will give it a maximum speed of 84 miles or 134 kilometers per hour. These engineers will inform those who are present that this new design has been modified to use helium instead of hydrogen to avoid another disaster like the British R-101 airship. Helium is not flammable and therefore poses much less of a risk to the ship, crew, and passengers. Hydrogen, on the other hand, is highly flammable. Although it is lighter than helium and therefore able to lift off more weight, the trade-off is that it poses a greater risk to anyone on board the airship. Everyone in attendance is impressed with the design, and the project is given the go-ahead. Components for the frame, gondola, and shell of LZ-129 are created later that year, but the overall construction of the airship isn't started until March 1932. The engines being built by Daimler-Benz need to be modified to reduce their weight, while also producing enough power to move LZ-129. Once this obstacle is overcome, the project begins to take off. Before the first flight of the LZ-129, the craft is given the name the Hindenburg. November 22, 1935, 1 year and 6 months before the Hindenburg disaster. China Clipper, you're clear for takeoff. A traffic controller says over the radio of the Pan American Airways M130's radio. Pilot Edwin Music engages the throttle. The engines roar as the plane speeds down the runway. The aircraft lifts off and banks hard, passing over San Francisco and heading out into the Pacific Ocean. It arrives at the Hawaiian island of Oahu 18.5 hours later. The 2,400-mile route is much longer than the crossing of the Atlantic. The China Clipper has cut the airship's time for crossing a similar distance by about 75%. This flight proves that airplanes, not airships, will likely be the future of air travel for passengers who are looking to get to faraway destinations quickly. The only reason that Pan Am has not yet flown the transatlantic route has to do with political reasons, not technological ones. Britain has refused to let the American company land its planes on their soil until they have an aircraft with comparable capabilities as the M130. Until that time, airships will continue to be the only method of commercial flight between Europe and the American continents. March 4, 1936, 1 year and 2 months until the Hindenburg disaster. The Hindenburg unmoors and lifts into the sky. At this moment, it becomes the largest aircraft to ever fly. At only 80 feet shorter than the Titanic, it'll make 10 round-trip voyages across the Atlantic to the United States and 7 more between Germany and Brazil in the first year of service. The fabric of the airship is covered in paint containing aluminum powder, which makes it shine and gives the vessel a distinctive silver color. On the tail fins are swastikas, dozens of feet in size. The Nazi Party is in control of Germany and is growing in strength. Adolf Hitler looks upon the marvelous airship his countrymen have built with approval. Inside the gondola of the vessel are 25 cabins with bunk beds. The floral wallpaper makes them feel homey, and the swaying of the airship rocks the passengers to sleep. Businessmen talk and sip cocktails in the lounge, while families eat their meals in the dining room. Both sides of the gondola have clear views over the landscape below. A group of men grab their cigars and head out toward the back of the airship, where they'll enter a pressurized room. The seal is fastened. A man takes out a match and strikes it. The flame licks the air as if testing it for further fuel. There is none. The room is airtight. This prevents the flames from ever coming into contact with the highly flammable hydrogen that provides the dirigible with lift. The original design for the Hindenburg was designed for use with helium. However, due to American export restrictions and isolationist policies, helium is hard to come by. In order to keep up with the demand for transatlantic flights, the Hindenburg and other European airships are filled with hydrogen. Many engineers believe the sophisticated design of modern airships like the Hindenburg has reduced the chances of a catastrophic accident occurring to almost zero. The risk is not quite zero, but negligible enough to keep the airships flying across the world using hydrogen. May 3, 1937, 7:16 p.m., 3 days before the Hindenburg disaster. The sky over Germany is a bright pink. A warm breeze blows across the landscape. The Hindenburg rises up into the air as if to greet the setting sun. The airship leaves its home base in Frankfurt, Germany, to begin its 63rd flight. There are 36 passengers and 61 crew members on board. Captain Max Pruss oversees the voyage. The Hindenburg proceeds north toward Cologne, Germany. Once they reach the Netherlands, Captain Pruss orders the helmsman to shift course west and follow the English Channel. Below, the cliffs of Beachy Head in southern England pass under the Hindenburg. Around 2 a.m., while many of the passengers are already asleep, the Hindenburg begins its journey across the Atlantic. This will be the last time the airship will fly above the dark blue waters of the ocean. May 4th, 2 days before the Hindenburg disaster. "May I get you anything else this evening?" a server asks an older couple who's just finished their meal in the dining room. They smile and shake their heads, telling the server everything was delicious as always. The crew member gives a polite smile and clears the table. Out the window, the white-capped waves of the northern Atlantic look like wisps of clouds in a turbulent night sky. Earlier that day, the airship passed over the icy shores of Greenland and is now heading toward Newfoundland. The headwinds have been stronger than usual, slowing the dirigible's progress. Regardless, the Hindenburg continues to push on, but its landing schedule has been delayed from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on May 6th. The guests don't mind this minor inconvenience. As long as they're on board the Hindenburg, they're treated like royalty. May 6th, 12 noon, 7 hours and 25 minutes until the Hindenburg disaster. The passengers scramble toward the windows to get a look at the city below. In the harbor, they can see the tall ships with their masts rising up into the sky. They're a relic of what transatlantic travel used to be. Boston has grown a lot in recent decades, but this city will seem small in the coming hours as the Hindenburg approaches its destination. 3:10 p.m., 4 hours and 15 minutes until the Hindenburg disaster. The skyscrapers of New York City are like concrete trees in a smoggy jungle. The density of tall towers is startling to anyone who hasn't seen the city before. The passengers take pictures and admire the industrial nature of the metropolis below. Many have already made plans to travel to the city after the dirigible lands to take in the sights and see a show. As the Hindenburg passes, New Yorkers look up at the silver behemoth in the sky. They shield their eyes from the sun, and an uneasy feeling settles in many of their stomachs. It's hard not to notice the red and black swastikas on the tail fins. Rumors have been coming out of Europe that the leader of the Nazi Party is amassing a large army. Top officials in Britain and France are becoming worried. The people of Europe and the United States have not forgotten about the atrocities of World War I and are wary of being plunged into a second World War, started by a Führer who speaks of creating a Third Reich in the form of a Nazi empire. 4:15 p.m., 3 hours and 10 minutes until the Hindenburg disaster. The airship proceeds south toward the Lakehurst Naval Air Station. It's here that the Hindenburg will dock, and the passengers will step foot on the ground for the first time in over 3 days. As Captain Pruss orders the helmsman to adjust course, the Hindenburg begins to shake. The weather outside has deteriorated. Charles Rosendahl, the commanding officer at Lakehurst, recommends that the landing be delayed until the weather improves. The Hindenburg turns back toward the coast and waits just off the shore of New Jersey for the storm to pass. 6 p.m., 1 hour and 25 minutes before the Hindenburg disaster. "Captain, looks like the conditions are improving," says one of the crew members on the bridge. Pruss nods and gives the order to prepare the Hindenburg for landing. 6:12 p.m. Commander Rosendahl sends a message to the Hindenburg that conditions are now suitable for landing at the base. 6:22 p.m. The Hindenburg makes its way toward the airfield at Lakehurst. The weather still seems to be favorable, and Rosendahl recommends that the airship lands as soon as possible before anything changes. 7 p.m., 25 minutes before the Hindenburg disaster. The Hindenburg cruises toward its landing site from the southwest. The dirigible is 600 feet or 183 meters off the ground. The wind still blows with gusts strong enough to rock the airship, but this may be the best chance the crew has to land the vessel safely. Captain Pruss orders the pilot to make a wide left turn and follow a large oval path as the airship descends toward the landing field. 7:08 p.m. "Captain Pruss, I recommend you land your vessel as soon as possible. The weather seems to be changing for the worst." Commander Rosendahl relays over the radio. Pruss acknowledges the message and orders hydrogen to be vented to reduce the buoyancy of the airship. In preparation for landing, First Officer Albert Samet informs the engineers controlling the gas and ballast boards that they need to vent hydrogen from the dirigible for the next 15 seconds. The helmsman continues the oval landing trajectory as the airship steadily falls from the sky. He pulls back on the throttle to slow the engines. "She feels heavy at the back, Captain," the pilot calls out. The order is given to vent more hydrogen from the cells in the bow of the airship for 30 more seconds. The Hindenburg's nose begins to rise slightly. Something is not quite right. Samet calls out for 3 water ballasts to be dropped, which unloads around 2,420 pounds or 1,100 kilograms from the back of the Hindenburg, and an additional 5 seconds of hydrogen to be released from the forward gas cells. "You 6 men head to the front of the airship and try to level her out," Samet says to the crew working at the aft section of the Hindenburg. The men leave their stations and run toward the front of the airship. Suddenly, the wind shifts directions. The planned approach relied on the airship landing with the wind, not against it. This would have allowed air currents to carry the Hindenburg toward the landing zone with minimal power from the engines. Now the engines need to be throttled up to provide the speed necessary to overcome the incoming wind. The airship continues to descend. There's no time to make another pass to land at a different angle. Captain Pruss orders the pilot to make an S-turn to slightly alter the Hindenburg's landing trajectory. This maneuver puts an enormous amount of stress on the structure of the ship. It'll later be theorized that as the S-turn is carried out, a bracing wire snaps inside the dirigible and swings uncontrollably like a snake trying to escape the clutches of a predator. This metal wire then slashes a gas cell, causing hydrogen to leak into the main shell. With the deadly mixture of hydrogen and oxygen spreading through the back of the Hindenburg, all it'll take is one tiny spark from the metal wire scraping against the steel frame to cause ignition. 7:21 p.m., 4 minutes before the Hindenburg disaster. The Hindenburg continues its final approach toward the mooring masts, where it can be secured and lowered to the ground. Power is adjusted to the engines to slow the airship's approach. "Drop the ropes!" Pruss yells from the bridge. Several thick ropes fall from the dirigible and land on the ground below. 7:24 p.m., 1 minute before the Hindenburg disaster. "What the hell is that?" a crew member named R.H. Ward says, pointing to the outer cover near the gas cell number 5 on the port side of the Hindenburg. The man securing one of the mooring lines next to him looks to where Ward is pointing. He squints. It's clear something is wrong. The outer cover of the airship is fluttering, as if pressurized gas is being released against it. Ward and his crewmate look down at the man standing on the mooring mast below. He's looking and pointing at the same location on the Hindenburg. "This can't be good. We need to tell the captain something is wrong right now," Ward shouts. 7:25 p.m. The moment the Hindenburg catches fire, a spark, from either charged particles releasing static electricity or from a loose metal cable inside the dirigible, ignites the hydrogen leaking from the aft fuel cells. The mix of oxygen and hydrogen in the air acts as fuel. The flames spread rapidly, tracing the hydrogen leak back to its source and causing the fuel cell to explode. The passengers and the crew on the gondola have no idea anything is wrong. However, the crew at the back of the Hindenburg watch in horror as the entire shell lights up with a bright yellow and orange flame. A shockwave of heat slams into their faces, throwing them backward. As the men recover, the inferno starts moving toward the front of the ship. The girders and the frame begin to melt. Pieces of metal fall from the top of the airship and slam into the walkways around the crew. They scramble to get away from the flames. Some individuals jump from the burning airship, praying that they don't pass out when they hit the ground and can crawl to safety. The metal frame turns molten red as the heat causes the structural integrity of the Hindenburg to fail. On the ground, the Navymen look up in horror. Only moments before, they spotted a mushroom-shaped flame bursting from the tail of the Hindenburg and heard a muffled explosion. It seemed as if this accident occurred near the rear port engine, the same area where the crewman Ward noticed the shell fluttering seconds earlier. The ground crew scrambles to get out of the way of the falling fireball as more and more of the Hindenburg is engulfed in flames. After the tail of the Hindenburg goes up in flames, the airship remains somewhat level for several seconds. But now that the tail is nothing more than a burning metal frame, the back of the airship begins to fall, and the nose of the Hindenburg rises up toward the sky. The fire is no longer contained to just the back of the airship. It quickly climbs toward the middle of the dirigible, incinerating anything in its path, including crew, passengers, and flammable objects. More and more bodies can be seen jumping from the Hindenburg, trying to escape the flames. Everyone on board now knows something terribly wrong is happening. The nose of the Hindenburg continues to rise. Passengers who are standing on the promenade to watch the landing are thrown off their feet and slam against the back wall. Panicking people dodge tables, chairs, and anything not secured to the floor as they fly past them. Screams fill the gondola as the heat from the flames rapidly approaches. 7:25 p.m. and 15 seconds. 15 seconds after the Hindenburg catches fire. The crew shouts at the passengers to jump for their lives. Anyone near a window crawls toward the opening and flings themselves out. Others try desperately to find loved ones who are in other parts of the ship. "Come on, we have to jump!" screams Herman Donner to his wife. "I can't leave my father," she shouts back, tears streaming down her face. The fire is eating away at the back of the gondola. Herman Donner has no choice. He grabs his 3 kids and jumps out of the window. His body slams into the ground, but he manages to pick himself up, grab his kids, and run to safety. He sobs as the flames consume the section of the airship where his wife went back to look for her father. Neither one of them make it out alive. Anyone still on the airship finds the closest window or exit and leaps to the ground as the molten skeleton of the Hindenburg continues to fall. However, not everyone is so lucky. Some passengers become stuck in their cabins or are flung toward the middle of the gondola, where the nose is lifted into the air. They don't have time to reach safety. These people are either burned alive or crushed as the flaming frame of the Hindenburg comes to rest on the ground below. This is also true for any crew members who are deep inside the airship at the time of ignition, such as the electricians located in the power room or a passenger by the name of Max Schultz who's in the smoking room at the time. Tragically, the 9 men who were at the front of the Hindenburg ended up having the worst chance of escaping. None of them survive, including the 6 men First Officer Albert Samt ordered to the front of the dirigible to level out the Hindenburg during its landing approach. Before the airship begins to tilt upward, these men were securing mooring lines. They likely did not hear the initial explosion as they were 800 feet away. However, when the nose started to rise toward the sky, they hang on for dear life. The distance to the ground increases rapidly, so anyone who does jump doesn't survive the fall. This means that as these men cling to the safety bars at the front of the ship, they can do nothing but wait for the rapidly approaching flames to reach them just before being consumed by a fireball. 7:25 and 30 seconds. 30 seconds after the Hindenburg catches fire. The last of the flaming remains of the Hindenburg fall to the ground. Passengers, crew, and Navymen run to safety. Smoke rises from their charred clothing. Soldiers who were on the ground and far enough away from the falling airship to not be in any immediate danger watch in terror as the fire spreads across the airfield. Chief Petty Officer Frederick J. Tobin is an airship veteran who's in charge of the landing party. "Navy men, stand fast," he shouts at the younger soldiers who are starting to back away from the tragic scene unfolding in front of them. Tobin begins running toward the burning Hindenburg, shouting orders to his men to follow. He had survived the crash of the USS Shenandoah over a decade earlier in 1925. Navymen who are running away from the crash site see Chief Petty Officer Tobin running past them back toward the Hindenburg. They turn around and follow their commanding officer toward the flames to rescue anyone they can. Firefighters and Navy staff work into the late hours of the evening to get the blaze under control. Surviving passengers and crew members of the Hindenburg are brought to hospitals in the area to be treated for severe burns and other wounds. After the dust settles, it's found out that of the 96 people on board, 62 survived the disaster. 13 of the 36 passengers, 22 of the 61 crew members, and 1 civilian in the landing party died in the flames and the wreckage of the Hindenburg on May 6, 1937. May 7th, one day after the Hindenburg disaster, the Graf Zeppelin reaches Germany and lands safely as it returns from Brazil. Word of the Hindenburg disaster has already spread across the world. The passengers of the Graf Zeppelin quickly walk away from the airship, counting their blessings that they were not aboard the Hindenburg the day before. They didn't know it at the time, but this will be the last international passenger airship flight ever. Several weeks after the Hindenburg disaster, an investigation launched into the cause of the Hindenburg tragedy finds no conclusive evidence for how the fire started. Most experts agree that some sort of atmospheric electrical discharge ignited hydrogen that had been leaking from one of the gas cells. Some claim that the Hindenburg disaster was caused by sabotage, but there's no evidence to support these claims, and the final report indicates that there was no foul play involved. Years after the Hindenburg disaster, Zeppelins continue to fly in Germany. Other airships are still being used throughout Europe and the United States. As long as the dirigibles are filled with helium, the chances of a fire destroying an airship like it did during the Hindenburg disaster are negligible. There are still accidents due to bad weather and operator errors that cost the lives of crew members, but the same can be said about any mode of transportation. Given enough time, the general public likely would have once again climbed aboard airships, just like people continued to ride ocean liners after the Titanic sank. However, airplanes had advanced tremendously and could make the same journeys as airships in a fraction of the time. People across the world began opting to take airplanes for long-distance flights, as they proved to be relatively safe and can reach their destination quicker than any other mode of transportation. With the increase in passenger flights and larger planes, airships become obsolete. Militaries and scientists around the world continued to use dirigibles, and they're even still used today. But the era of airships that carried passengers across the oceans and over continents ended when the Hindenburg erupted in flames above the airfield at Lakehurst in 1937. Now watch Atomic Bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki minute by minute, or check out What If Russia Launched a Nuclear Bomb minute by minute.